Clint Emerson, welcome to the show, my friend. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me. How you doing?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for being here. So real quick, fanboy moment. I got exposed to you because my wife bought me your book, gosh, a couple of years ago now, 100 Deadly Skills. And I know you've had multiple books since then, and we're going to get into all of that. But that's how I first got exposed to you. I love that book, and I've gone on to buy it for a few of my buddies as cool Christmas gifts. So love that book.
Awesome. Glad you like it. I do joke about that. It's the most popular book next to a man's toilet. So I don't know if that's true, but I think it's fitting.
I think it's fitting. I don't want to say where did you come up with the idea, but I mean, there's a lot of information packed into that book. You're a former operator, former Navy SEAL, and we'll get in more of this into detail, excuse me. But where did that idea come from for that style format?
Yeah, the format, I'm kind of one of those guys that loves like the SAS handbook and some of these other survival guides I'd seen over the years. Even the Boy Scout handbook back in the day, yeah. I still have my original. And I always felt like I learned best when I had a little bit of narrative along with some pictures. And so I knew that I wanted to do something creative like that. And it wasn't until a buddy of mine basically said, "Hey, you want to do a book together?" And I was like, "Sure." And so we had come up with the idea together, but he's an older guy, ended up having back surgery and left me hanging, and basically was like, "You're on your own." And so I put it together, and it turned out it's a fun book. A lot of people love it, both good guys and bad guys, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So Clint, for the few people who don't know you, 100 Deadly Skills is probably where they know you best. Brag for a minute. Give me another bullet point or two about your background and kind of where people would know you from.
Yeah. I mean, being a retired SEAL, you get a lot of attention, whether you want it or not. It seems to be kind of the military brand of the last, decade for sure. And then of course, 100 Deadly Skills, that's turned into kind of a book series with, I'm working on number 3 right now. And then of course they know me from The Right Kind of Crazy, which is more of a memoir, that also has illustrations in it that are fun. Just talking about, the way I label that book is, bad decisions make for great stories. And so it's a book full of just bad decisions.
I love that. That is a very smart way of approaching that. Bad decisions do make for the best stories. If you think back onto your life, and I talk about this every once in a while, when many of us think about their best memories in our life, high school or after or college or what have you, it's usually when we've made a bad decision and we have little or no resources, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And then we grow up and we're like, okay, we got to make money so that we have like nice stuff. So we have a house and a car that like actually works and what have you. And we get away from the things that we used to do that would give us the best memories, right? It's like a weird thing that we know that, take a risk, have some fun. You don't need a lot of money. As a matter of fact, having less money can, oddly enough, be more fun in a weird way because it sort of forces you to do silly stuff. And yet as adults, we run completely in the other direction, right? We work long hours to collect a bunch of money to not have any of those cool experiences or memories or moments. I've always thought that's such a weird human trait that we do.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's called growing up, and maturity is boring. Immaturity is fun.
100%. Okay. So
yeah.
You weren't born being a Navy SEAL. Where were you born? And let's get into you making the decision to become a SEAL. And more specifically, when you get out of the SEAL training and becoming an author, which is not typically what Navy SEALs were sort of known for, is their narrative skills.
Well, yeah, that's true. Now there isn't a SEAL without a book these days, but
it's changed a little bit. Yep.
yeah. Actually, I grew up, just to answer your questions, I grew up in Texas, all the way up until I was 8. Then my dad got hired by an oil company over in Saudi. So then I grew up in Saudi from the second grade through high school. Then I came back to Texas and finished out school, college. And then the whole time I'd wanted to be a SEAL. I wanted to be a SEAL since I was 10. And that was before movies and books and the internet. I'm an 80s kid. So in the 80s, the only thing I had to go by was, I think, one book, and it was illustrated. Or no, it was photos of, SEALs coming out of the water, SEALs on Zodiac, SEALs jumping out of airplanes. And that was really the only thing that I had to go by. And I had that book everywhere I went for most of my childhood and like teen years. And then I met a SEAL back in Germany. We were coming back to the States, and it was in the airport, and he had some tattoos, and I was asking about, what's this and what's that? And he kind of explains it and tells me this long story that turned out to be completely fraudulent, which is the whole story is in the right kind of crazy. But basically, here's a guy who wasn't even a SEAL. Later on in life, I figured out this guy was just full of shit. And basically my whole dream was put into position by a fraud. So,
wow.
And then once I got done with about 3.5 years of college, I had one semester left before I graduated, and I just had to go get it out of my system. I felt like I was getting old. And when you're in your early 20s, compared to some people who go into the military after high school, that is old to be joining. And so I don't know, I just had this itch, and I went for it. My dad was pissed for a split second. Like, all you got is a semester left. And I'm like, whatever, I can do that anytime. And so I felt like I was ready, and I went. I just signed the dotted line and went in the Navy. I ended up in Bud's class 203, and I finished with that class, which is kind of a big deal in our world. Ended up at SEAL Team 3 for half my career. Then I went to the NSA for a little while. Then I finished my career at Development Group in Dam Neck, which is, the team that always makes the news. And I retired in 2015. And since then, I've just kind of been doing, fun projects like 100 Daily Skills and then my books. And then my company.
It's not really easy. It's really freaking hard. And you must have doubted yourself and wanted to quit a bunch of times. Now, kind of from what I know from having friends that are SEALs and having interviewed some SEALs on this show, is that's the whole thing of the training, is never quitting, right? That's really the thing that the training is trying to get out of you more than anything else, is really sort of that attitude. It's sort of mental fortitude. And you test the mind by testing the body. I get it. But that doesn't mean the doubt doesn't creep in. That doesn't mean that the fear and the wanting to doesn't creep in. It sort of means you deal with it. So can you tell us a little bit about sort of the mental side of it? You could watch the physical side on TV. I'm more interested in you and what it was like when you're in that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. You don't quit. That is definitely like the term, never quit. And thinking about it, I think every guy has these moments where it's not necessarily like, I'm going to go quit. It's more like, man, it's more of a self-doubt thing, I think, personally, where you go, am I really going to make it another day in this shit or what? And that little bit of doubt and insecurity, for me, was kind of like the fuel. The other fuel was seeing other people quit. And it sounds horrible, but the reality is every time someone got up and went and rang the bell, I was kind of like, good, because I don't want to be hanging out with people that don't want it that bad. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it boiled down to passion. You've got to have the passion, you've got to have the heart, and all of that is what leads to all those other big D's, right? Dedication, devotion, determination. And, eventually you get to that point where you're standing there graduating one day. And, but yeah, I think passion is number one, and that passion will certainly overcome any of the doubts or insecurities you might have through it. You're going to still face those no matter what, because that's how the training is designed.
Right.
The military is all about breaking you down physically, mentally, and then building you back up into a more spirited, better kind of warrior. And Bud certainly has figured that out. I mean, my class started with 180 guys, and then there was only 28 originals that graduated. And so that weed out says it all.
Yep.
But everyone thinks about not necessarily quitting, because I never really imagined myself running to that bell and ringing it. The thought of that is what kept me there, right? It's like,
right.
But yeah, but you have your moments though, where you're like, yeah, am I really that capable? Am I really am I good enough to be here? And just, I mean, one of the connections I've found through all this that's pretty interesting is that most of my buddies that have made it to the 0.0001% of the United States military, they all come from broken homes. Most of them, and so they're constantly, whether mom left or dad left or whatever happened with the family structure at home when they were a kid or in their teenage years, there's something in that creates a person who is always trying to either prove to themselves or maybe even prove to that one parent that they are good enough. So, and I think that's a piece of it too.
Yeah, so I would say yes and to that point, which is I would extend that to high performers in the business world as well. The founders, the startup folks, the people who are crazy and take these big risks and turn it into this amazing successful business rarely come from sort of nice, normal middle America families. They usually have a chip on their shoulder with something to prove. And I mean that in a good way, because at least I hope I do, I'm one of those people. And so I fit cleanly into that stereotype. And yeah, there is just something in them, whether they have to prove it to themselves or to others, that I like to call it the fire in the belly, where you'll just run through a wall just to show everybody you can, right? It's just, it's not the smartest thing. It's not, but it is effective. So
yeah, no, I'm with you.
I really wanted to get into your business, right? In crisis management. To me, founding a business is one of the most difficult things that any human can undertake, because the difference between starting a business and completing SEAL training is SEAL training is obviously enormously difficult. I think everybody knows that in the whole wide world at this point, but you just have to make it. Not to say that that's easy. It's incredibly difficult, but at least you go, okay, I've got to make it this many days. Great. When you go to start a business, figure it out. There's no anything, right? There's no guide that tells you how to do it. There's no formula for success. There's no, well, in 28 days, you're going to graduate, so it'll be okay in 28 days. It's just, okay, go figure it out, right? And it's a very different kind of hard, but in some ways can be scarier in that there is no end goal in sight. There's no other people that you can say, hey, tell me how to do this. Yes, there's advice in a million business books out there, but frankly, you can't sell success. You have to go and do it and make mistakes and bump along the way. So how did you go from, all right, you graduated, you put your tours in, fantastic. You decide to retire. You want to start a business. Let's start there and then start walking forward.
Yeah, mine was kind of an interesting turn of events. When I was at the NSA, it's a little bit of a sidebar, but it leads to the answer. I was teaching, you name it, FBI, CIA. I was teaching all these guys how to be the gray guy when they travel overseas. And there was nothing out there tangible that taught it. So I was kind of having to, all right, I got to not necessarily make it up, but what I did is I took a lot of experiences and information and research that I could find. I put together this 3-ring binder that basically laid out how to blend in when you're overseas, threat reduction, mitigation, so you're you're not targeted by bad guys, terrorists. So I put all that information together and started teaching it. And long story short, I got tired of giving out binders, and I was like, well, I want to turn this thing into a book, something that I can hand out for free. Yeah. So I turned it into something that more basically was a book. And then that little book ended up circulating through the defense contracting world. Then it ended up in the hands of a retired FBI guy who happened to be the head of security, global security for the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones. And so I get a call out of the blue while I'm still in the Navy and says, hey, this book you put together, one of my buddies gave it to me. It's good stuff. I want all my journalists to know this. So I need you to turn this book into e-learning so that they can log in and learn this stuff from anywhere in the world. And I'm like, what? So anyway, I was like, okay. And literally the book became a business in one phone call. And so I called up a developer and I sent him the book, and then, they put together this extraordinary graphic experienced e-learning. And this was, 10 years ago. So these days, everything's video, but back then it was like click on the screen and do this. And it was all this experience-based learning through, clicking on stuff. And anyway, it was really cool, and it's still on their servers to this day. And, anyway, that kind of kickstart me into, all right, I put this book together. I've created this e-learning. I had one successful sale. Then it was like, but I don't know what I'm doing. So then at that point, I started putting together a business plan. I started talking to everybody I could about, how do you get something started, or keep something going in that instance. And so I kind of put everything together, but as I put it together, it would evolve. And then I'd put that together, then that would evolve, and it would evolve, and it would evolve. And it's constantly evolving. This pandemic, I think, has forced all of us to evolve again in a big way. Yep. And so if anything I learned is that business really is all about constant continuation of adaptation and evolution to, stay with whatever the market needs. And my market is crisis management. So travel security was super, super important back then. That's when Danny Pearl got his head cut off, because he went to a source meeting to write his next article for the Wall Street Journal. And then he ended up in orange pajamas and on YouTube, a week later. So now we don't worry about that so much. So it went from a travel security company to today now, where I actually, was doing pandemic policies and planning long before the pandemic kicked in. But yeah, it's, for me, it was talk to as many people as I could in my network, people who had gotten out and started businesses, and you take notes and you kind of figure out over time, like, what's the information I need, and then what's the rest that's just crap, because there's a lot of information out there on how to start a business, and most of it's just like administrative stuff that doesn't really start a business, Yep. So yeah, it was a little trial and error, of course, like anything, but I feel like, for me, being a subject matter expert or doing the research and becoming an expert in something is the first step to your business, especially as an entrepreneur that's consulting or doing stuff in a very, niche area.
Right. No, I love that. That's a very interesting way of you getting into business, and specifically being an entrepreneur, right? Part skill set, part luck, part, coincidence or convalescence, if you will, of things that needed to happen. So it's all of those things. And that is true for every business that is out there. I will tell you, our business, my actual job, not podcasting, the one that actually pays the bills. We happen to be standing in the right place at the right time. Had a great team. We had a lot of experience, but standing in the right place at the right time. And I'm the first person to say, yep, we happen to be here. And thankfully we got a big tailwind. So it helped us out a lot. That's a big part of being in business. And sometimes you got to take a lot of at bats before the wind heads in your direction, right? And there's sort of nothing wrong with that. Everybody's a little bit different in that process. So, okay. So I want to know, how did you get sales, right? Like how did you get like customer number 2?
Well, yeah, you're right. It was like, put together the product, and then I got lucky with someone seeing it in them by one question taking me to the next level, right? Do you turn it into e-learning, or do you do e-learning? And then me going, what the fuck is that?
Right.
And then I go and I figured it out, and I didn't know if that sale was actually there. We all know that someone can call and say, I want this, I want that, and it never turns to crap. So so I was taking a leap of faith and sold it once. And then I was like, how do I repeat this now? I was still in the Navy, right? And I'm still deploying, I'm still doing my job, but what I was doing was burning at both ends. I was working my job and doing SEAL stuff at night overseas. And then during the days, I would work on this stuff. So now sales.
That's so crazy.
I found one of these. I was living in the DC area, and so there was this company basically that's a force multiplier and does sales calls for you. And me not knowing anything, I was like, well, that seems like a good idea for someone like me who's active duty military and gone all the time. So they built with them. I sat down and we built a music sheet. And what's funny to me is I had no idea what that was. And it's really the pitch, right?
Right.
And then they started making calls on my behalf, charging me a fortune. So at this point, I've racked up my credit card to probably I don't know, it was like $40,000. And they managed to get they had me on the phone. I'd be all over the world, right? And they'd say, hey, via email, we've got a call scheduled with this person. We've got a call scheduled with this person. Most of those calls, as we all know, go nowhere. But they landed calls for me. And then there was the one call. And it was with my next client. Who would have thought, and who thought it would have been, was one of your largest health insurance companies in the United States. And I get on the phone and they're like, can you come and, do a presentation on your capabilities next week? And I'm like, yes. And I don't even remember where I was. I just made it happen. Right. And, so healthcare capital of the world is Louisville, Kentucky, right? Every single major healthcare insurance provider, you see their buildings on the skyline. But so here I am showing up to this, like, what the hell? And I have no idea what I'm doing. I've had briefing experience and presentation experience through the job, where sometimes you're sitting in front of, obviously high-ranking military folks and congressmen and senators and this and that. And I showed up to that meeting. I was one of 12 people presenting that day. I was the last one. The lady comes into the lobby and she's like, I hope you've got your shit squared away because everyone else has sucked. And I was like, oh my God, because I have no idea what I'm doing. Right.
Right.
And so I roll in, there's like a dozen people sitting there, and I just kind of went through it. I used some skills from the military. I kept all my slides black and white, none of this graphic, eye chart crap. Mm-hmm. I kept it exactly the way our leaders like to see briefs, where this is the concept of operation. These are the courses of action. Here's the bottom line up front. Got any questions? And then they were like, yeah. They asked me a bunch of questions. I answered them the best I could. And then that was that. And 2 weeks later, I walked out there, flew home, was like, that's not going to happen. And then within 2 weeks, that's how I got the second client. They called and said, we liked you. I'm like, really? And keep in mind, I still really don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I'm just figuring it out as I go. So
I love it.
That one was to rebuild an entire workplace violence program for a Fortune 100 company, right?
Wow.
That's 64,000 employees would be seeing my work. And somehow, I think that's the other point here is like, sometimes, you don't necessarily need to have all your ducks in a row or have this elaborate business plan or all this stuff. You just kind of have to just go for it from time to time. and see what happens. I could have easily, not gotten any of those sales and still have a credit card with, $50,000, $60,000 on it. But
Right.
you have to invest in yourself. You have to take risks in yourself in order for there to be any true payout. And that's kind of been my philosophy now.
So one of the things that we do on this show, now we're in the meat of things here, is we try to coax out what I call these truth-isms, right? And so we've had a bevy of people on the show, from authors to NFL stars to former SEALs, rappers, entertainers, race car drivers, you name it. And one of the things that we try to sort of tease out through getting really granular into people's stories, so thank you for being so candid, is these sort of universal truths that apply to all of those people and all their various backgrounds and how they were able to achieve some of their success. And you just nailed it, which is, I didn't know how to do this thing, but I was willing to take a bet on it. I'm betting on myself, so I know I'm going to work hard because it's me and I'm putting my money on the line. And while that sounds overly simplistic, it's really easy to say. It is quite difficult to do. Right. And for you to go in, kudos to you for going into, frankly, debt to be able to build a business that you didn't even know if it really was a business, or at least if there was more than one customer out there. So yeah, that is one of those things that truthism is universal from all the different people that we have spoken to, is they've gotten way out of their comfort zone, done something they either didn't know how to do or didn't even know if they were ever going to land, and ultimately it panned out, but it wasn't always easy. So thank you for sharing that, because that was a great story. Okay, yeah. So you've got that second customer now. That's a meaningful customer, by the way. Now you've got a nice, bright, shiny name on the old resume too. So that really helps you kind of level up. And then, do you build any kind of sales funnel thereafter? So how does customers number 3 through 15 come in?
Yeah. So then it became, I started learning, right? So then you start hiring people and getting people to start making calls and get, every form of sales and reasons to reach out and touch people, whether it be through, social media, LinkedIn, newsletters. I mean, you really just start ramping everything up, and try to touch as many people as possible. And you just hope that through touching, thousands, you get one. And as we all know, that's sometimes those old school tactics are now becoming new school tactics, right? Where you call people and you talk to people, and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, I'm so glad you called, because no one wants to read 1,000 emails a day from a bunch of strangers." So, anyway, so through the sales process, I started racking up a couple of more big names. But most of the time, what benefited me most was to talk to a global security director or the head of HR, which are the people I target, and say, "Hey, would you mind referring me to any of your peers at other companies?" And they're like, "Sure. I just left Pepsi, a year ago. I'll let them know." And I was like, "Okay, great." And then another guy was global security director for, like J.C. Penney. And when it started circling the drain, he went over and became the big guy for a major hotel chain. And so I went from one client to that client. And so over time, you just keep, reaching out and touching people and staying in touch with them and send them a thank you, and all the old school tactics I truly believe in, like the handwritten notes and, a phone call every now and then, or just forward a little article that you think they would like. Or, I mean, there's so many freaking things that are so easy and take seconds to do that keep you in the game. And before you know it, you go from 2 contracts to 3 contracts to 10 contracts. And now you're trying to just figure out how you're going to get it all done. And that's where it was and has kind of been since I've been out. But I think the word of mouth piece and referrals was definitely the winner. And the other thing that helped is continue writing, right? So I always push people to write books, because it's the biggest billboard you'll ever have without spending one fucking dime. You'll put in the time, you'll actually make money, but 100 Deadly Skills is in 12 languages and it's global now. So I've gotten clients for Escape the Wolf and Crisis Management because of some guy who is a higher up in a company sitting on the toilet reading 100 Deadly Skills and goes, I like this guy. And then before you know it, that Fortune 500 now becomes a client, and if you put together really well, a very wealthy guy once told me, well-placed ink on paper will outweigh that same exact in gold any day of the week. It's just got to be well-placed ink will outweigh gold any day of the week, right? And if you really think about it, it's pretty amazing. And if you just write down something and get published, then a ton of doors open up, and it leads to a lot of just consistent publicity and things that really is what drives everything I've got going.
So hold on, there's a couple things. I was laughing when you said handwritten note because I am a big believer in that. So I'm a big believer in building your network, building your friendships, right? Building that sort of sphere and thinking about friendships in a different way. And some people get a little uncomfortable with what I'm about to say, which is you have to actively, especially as we get older and we have families, responsibilities, and career, you have to be an active participant in your friendship. Meaning you've got to figure out who you want to be friends with and burn some freaking calories to go be friends with good people because they're time constrained just like you. So one of the things that I do, and I talk about it all the time, is handwritten notes, small gifts. I don't mean some big lavish thing. I might mean like a news article or like tear it out of a magazine that I thought that they would like or what have you. And just yesterday, I'm in the startup world. That's kind of my background. And just yesterday, I met with a startup that what they do is handwritten notes in bulk. Now, what makes them a little bit different is that they've developed a robot that holds a ballpoint pen that copies your handwriting so that you can send out hundreds or thousands of handwritten notes out to people, because in a digital age, this is their pitch, but it's going to sound like what you just said. In a digital age, it's very easy to delete an email and ignore it. It is way different to get a handwritten note in the mail. You just instantly are, gravitate towards it because they're so rare. They're so few. And so because of that, you get the attention, you get the eyeballs. So everything you're just saying, I was cracking up. I'm like, oh my God, I had that meeting literally yesterday. So yeah, that stuff really, really does work.
That's awesome.
Just next to my computer here, there's a stack of stationery with my name on it that I use to send out as thank you cards and what have you. So that really simple stuff, everybody, it really does work. You just got to keep going with it, as Clint said. So, okay, that is an amazing story on how you built your business. Now, let's be honest here. There were times where you didn't think your business was going to work, right? It wasn't just vertical. What were you thinking during that period of you got one customer and then you worked real hard and got a second customer? Did you think at any time you're going to go get a job at Lowe's or Home Depot or like what?
Oh, yeah.
Like, tell me, right?
Yeah, no, dude, I mean, I think most people who've been in this know that. I think, heck, it's like once a week where I'm like, I don't know if this is going to keep going or not. I don't know if this is going to keep going or not. I don't know if I mean, it's pretty regular for me. And I go, God, I haven't gotten a phone call or an email from anybody lately. I don't know if this business is really viable anymore. And I've been saying that since I started. I mean, it really, like literally, there's times when I'm like, I'm throwing my hands up, forget it. Nobody wants crisis management. You go and you present active shooter programs, natural disaster, medical, and they say, yeah, I want it. And then you never call you again. Right. And so whenever I have those moments, I'm like, fuck this, I'm going to do something different. But for some reason I go, no, somebody's going to eventually need it. Mm-hmm. Or the news is going to force people to feel like they need it, or whatever crisis du jour is going on. Crisis management is always here. And so the key is just, man, all those times where I was like, I'm just not going to do this anymore. I would come up with a way to pivot or evolve and take all that negative energy and just put it back into the business in a way that hopefully takes you to the next level each time. But I'm out is once a week, once a month with me.
So if people out there, there's sort of what I call the Instagram life, right? Which is you look at Instagram or social media in general, and you just think, man, these people's lives are so perfect. Perfect relationship, perfect business, perfect vacation, perfect everything. And especially when it comes to the entrepreneur and what I call the wantrepreneur space, where we've glamorized what entrepreneurship is. And I kind of have this little joke, which is, start a business today, private jet and caviar tomorrow, right? That's the lie that is sold. Because the reality is you get on a plane, you fly to Louisville and do a pitch and have no freaking idea if it's going to work. And if it didn't work, you're still out the price of the plane ticket. You're still out the price of the hotel and your time. And well, you're out, right? It's real simple. So don't we wish? Don't we wish is an understatement. Okay, so now the business is under a nice stride. You've built your name bigger and bigger. You've got multiple books now. So your latest book, and can we talk a little bit more about that book specifically? Because you moved into more of like a memoir style, right?
Yeah, I put together The Right Kind of Crazy, mainly because the publisher was kind of like, hey, 100 Daily Skills was successful. You've got 2 of them out there. I think people want to know who the author is. And I'm like, They just knew that Seal sells, and a memoir sometimes can makes them a lot of money is what it boils down to. But, and I'm going to caveat that, because people assume you make a bunch of money off of books too, which you can, but it's hit and miss. So, to put it in perspective for all the future authors out there, you get 15% when you're a published guy. Whereas when you self-publish, you get 90% of the take. Mm-hmm. So just another business tip, you write a book, get published, get your name, get the following, and then self-publish the rest of themselves, not really the author. Okay, so I just lost what the hell the question was. Put me back on path here.
So your memoir, you kind of formats into the memoir, right?
That's right. Sorry. So Right Kind of Crazy, really, I wanted to put together a book that wasn't like the rest. I feel like the rest pretty much have I was a badass when I was a kid. I grew up, I became a badass. Hey, I'm still a badass, right? They never really admit to their flaws or their mistakes or their life issues. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to be true to who I always am, and that is brutally honest. Sometimes, to a fault, it just lays it all out there. All of the mistakes, like adultery when you're married, mistakes I made at work, mistakes I made growing up, mistakes. And because I felt like people will learn from the more human aspects than they will from the I'm a superhero crap that a lot of guys get sucked into. And it's unfortunate because people think we're knight in shining armor and we do all these great things around the planet. We do great things, but we are, I would say, my peer group that I grew up with are more like pirates than we are like knight in shining armor. And I wanted to make that very, very clear in the book that, think about it for a second. Think about what you're asking us to do. Do you really want Boy Scouts going and doing that? Or do you want a bunch of murderers going and doing it? Right. And that's what it boils down to, right? So no one's ever said it like that, though. Like, we just happen to be a bunch of criminals that picked the right side of the line to be on. I could have very easily gone to the dark side. Right. In fact, I still think about that every day. I mean, how cool would it be, right? I mean, to go just totally on the dark side of life and see what that's like. I mean, but we all know there's, you know, there's laws, and so it's not a good idea to break the law. So if you want to go cause trouble in other people's countries for the government. Just don't do it in your own backyard.
That's great advice. I love that.
So
I'm kind of anti-trope here. So a big part of what we do is kind of poking the holes through all this fake motivation bullshit.
Yeah.
And
that's pretty much. Yeah.
One of my favorite quotes to make fun of is, you know, the live every day like it's your last. And I said, well, you know, I always look at that and go, if that were true, I would be on the beach with cocaine and hookers. So apparently you're not supposed to do that long term. That's not a great, you know, long-term plan. So you know, live every day like your last is great if you only live the one day. but it's kind of a bummer if you end up living a little bit longer than that, right? So
it's you wake up the next day and you're like, oh no.
Oh no, what did I do? What did I do? All right, so the book for everybody is fantastic. I'm about halfway through it. Really enjoying it so far. I love the human quality of it, and it actually reminded me in one small facet in the back of my mind was the Chris Kyle book. And the reason there was one thing that stuck out at me in the Chris Kyle book that was similar to yours in maybe this is just my weird mind works is in Chris Kyle's book, he would talk about how there would be a sniper position and they'd be waiting there all freaking day. Nothing would happen, boring as anything. Those guys would get up, Chris would sit down, there was a target immediately. And he talks about like, that's just dumb luck. Like that's not me being good. That's just the luck of the draw. And he had the luck of the draw, as it were, in that weird situation, if you want to call it that, multiple times, right? And so he humanized this thing where he was like, hey man, I'm not really a superhero. I had more opportunities at this thing than other people. So don't just think that, you know, it's all, sort of all me. So he humanized it, right? And so when I was reading your book, I was like, oh, wow, that stuck out in my mind when I read Kyle's book forever ago, when it came out. And when I read yours, I was like, look, another human being, another guy I can have a beer with, right? Not a superhero that I can never live up to.
Right. No, you know, that's a perfect example of, it really defines any guy's military career. There's that luck, timing, in the right place at the right time, you know, because there's plenty of guys who've gone 20 years plus like me and never got to pull the trigger in anger. You know, it's really, it doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter, you know, sometimes all of the qualifications, the evaluations, and, you know, everything that you've trained for, none of that matters. It's just right time at the right place, and then boom, you get to have a lot of fun. And it's unfortunate for the guys that didn't get that, because, you know, the crazy thing about, you know, a soldier's life or a SEAL's life is that the pinnacle of our career is war, which is the opposite of what most of the world wants, right? But for us, you know, that's a big deal. We need to go to war. We need to be in battle. That's what we want. And so if you don't get that, you know, some would say, hey, that's great. But for us, you would say, no, that's horrible. So
right.
Yeah, right time and right place.
So believe it or not, we've already been chatting here for an hour. This has been incredible. I'd love to send our audience to learn more about you. Where can they go?
Yeah, the easy button where my whole ecosystem resides is at clintemerson.com. And Instagram really is kind of like my main platform. It pushes to the rest, but following 100 Deadly Skills or Clint Emerson on Instagram is probably the best way to see what I'm up to.
Fantastic. Clint, this has been huge for me. I really appreciate you being on the show today. This has been fantastic. We'll have links and everything in the show notes to his socials, to his website, etc. So you can grab it there. Clint, again, thank you so much for being here, man. This has been a real treat.
Hey, thanks for having me, and it was a great conversation.
Yeah, appreciate getting to know you. Till next time, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.